This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook. Chapter 21, Santa Won't Be Back. Christmas was the biggest day of the year. We started anticipating the next one a few days after the one at hand wound down. As the big day approached, slightly less than a year away, we would begin the whole ritual of talking about what we wanted. For us, receiving was much preferred to giving. With Lobster, it was always something elaborate, sophisticated, and expensive. Maybe a miniature TV, or perhaps aqualungs. Why not a new fishing boat? The haranguing and harassment would begin as he tortured my mom and dad. He was relentless in his dogged pursuit of the one thing he must have. Then there were those of us with more modest tastes. I was quite satisfied with a new bike, a football, a bow and arrow, a sleeping bag, or maybe a Bowie knife. Mom was perhaps more enamored of the day than we were, if that's possible. She would prod and poke us about what we might want and play the "Have you been a good boy?" game for all it was worth. When it came to young boy behavioral management, Christmas was one of her only levers. She would urge us to make lists, truly one of the most obnoxious and crass commercial practices known to U.S. citizenry. Of course, we were more than willing to engage in the Santa Claus charade as we worked through the process to maximize our take on this special day. A month before Santa's arrival, we would become easily agitated and start to jump around excitedly. We'd race around the neighborhood on our bikes with an intensity that, to adults, had no discernible origin. A week away, and we were jabbering uncontrollably, wrestling and tacking one another to bleed off some of the immense excitement of old St. Nick's pending arrival. On the eve, we entered a state of delirium, absolutely unable to contain our enthusiasm and immeasurable anticipation. We were crazed after dinner, as the countdown had officially begun. But the traditional rituals always held: cookies and milk for Santa, the reading of the night before Christmas, hanging the stockings, photos of us sitting in our pecking order in front of the tree, smiling, pajama-clad, with toothy grins. All we wanted to do was go to bed and wake with Santa's largesse spread across the living room floor. Of course, we could not sleep. My parents would have fillets and an extra cocktail to fortify themselves for the hours they would spend in assembly. To my understanding, this was my dad's chore once Mom tucked herself into bed after the sugar plums began to dance in her head. There were bikes and puzzles and guns and knives, games, tents, model cars and fighter planes, skateboards and kites, and of course, overstuffed stockings. There was no end to the variety of junk that my parents dragged into the living room and placed under the tree on Christmas Eve. Our version of Christmas had two kinds of gifts: the wrapped kind and the unwrapped kind. A bike, motorcycle, or drum set are all hard gifts to wrap. A single bow would suffice. Hankies and ties were easy gifts to wrap. My aunts and uncles on Long Island would obviously send the wrapped kind, usually hankies and ties, and always books. In early December, the gifts would begin to arrive. I noticed that the quantity and quality seemed to be directly correlated with the frequency and duration of our relatives' visits to our home during the coming winter months. Mom would hide the gifts mostly in her bedroom closet until it reached capacity, at which time she would tuck them in other discreet places, and then often forget where. Many a summer afternoon was interrupted by a raucous laugh as she came across a lonely Christmas gift that had been hidden a bit too well. Dad would erect the giant evergreen tree shipped on some truck all the way from Oregon, at which point Mom would have us help her carry out the obscene collection of gifts and place them in a certain way in an attempt to elevate our excitement for her favorite holiday. Given all the hype, no one could really fault my brothers and me for being unable to control our unbridled enthusiasm that fateful Christmas morning. We went through the traditional regimen the night before and gladly went straight to bed with unheard of enthusiasm after but a single request. I did not know who awoke first, but like falling dominoes, deep in the night, one woke one and then the other woke another, and in an instant my older brothers and I were up and huddling together, wide awake and very excited in the dark bedroom. Lobster whispered that he had just ventured quietly out into the darkened edge of the living room, and sure as he was standing before us, had spotted old Saint Nick finishing up his delivery. He then swore, with equal passion, that the portly old elf had somehow navigated our pitch-black family room and squeezed up and out of our 30-foot-tall chimney. We wanted to believe, and maybe we did, just a little bit. What happened next was classic juvenile behavior seasoned with poor judgment. Somehow the three of us put our heads together and decided that we would celebrate Christmas early. At 3 a.m., with a single lamp casting a dim light, we unwrapped all of the Christmas presents. Within 20 minutes, we had managed to open possibly 50 gifts of socks, handkerchiefs, costume jewelry, ties, slippers, more handkerchiefs, and a couple of belts, some aged scotch, and a small library of books. It went on and on. All had come from numerous friends and family from the cold north, and some from Mom and Dad. By the time we finished, no one could have guessed who had intended which gifts for whom. To cap this magnificent Christmas morning, we decided, with no more presents to open, to do the next logical thing. We'd take our new bikes out for an early morning spin. They were beauties, and we could smell the fresh rubber tires. We'd all been raised on Schwinn's. It was the all-American brand made exclusively in Chicago by a German gentleman, not surprisingly, named Schwinn. He competed with Huffy and Murray and a rapidly growing group of other bicycle manufacturers at the turn of the century. Dad held Schwinn out to be quite durable and of superior quality. Knowing his four boys, durability trumped all. The Europeans were first in the game of two-wheeled contraptions, but the Japanese were on the move. Frankly, both were pedaling a lot faster than Schwinn. While the American Icon had market share and the top brand in the U.S., a bunch of other companies had figured out how to make better bikes for less. As Schwinn slowly stagnated in design, their organized labor costs rose rapidly. Though they did not know it, a tipping point of sorts had occurred. Increasingly, the French, British, Italians, and Japanese were chipping away at Schwinn's dominance in America. One year, our local bicycle dealer added a new British brand to his product lineup. It went by the name Donelt and was a gloriously refined and light premium offering. Sitting next to a Schwinn standard of the day, the Schwinn just looked, well, standard. The Donelt weighed a third less. That Christmas night, the Brits arrived in our living room in the form of Donelt bikes. Mine was cherry red. Ever so quietly, we rolled the gleaming, shiny new British machines right out the front door, mounted them, and tore down the street in our pajamas. After a couple of high-speed laps around the block, it was deserted except for a neighbor we did not recognize out walking his dog. We pulled back into the living room, parked our pristine bikes under the tree, and with satisfied sighs, scurried off to bed. Much of the heavy work was out of the way. We could sleep at last. At roughly 7 a.m. that Christmas morning, Mom and Dad slowly descended the stairs from their master suite and very nearly experienced dual cardiac arrests. they stood frozen solid on the landing, mouths agape. Stretched before them was a sea of empty boxes, wrappings, and tags. All the best this holiday season, loved Jean. Happy holidays, loved Carrie. Merry, Merry, love Mary. Tags galore, previously attached to wonderful gifts, were scattered all about. The floor spanning the entire living room seemed to be littered with gifts, conveniently unwrapped with absolutely no indication of the giver or the recipient. What happened next is somewhat hazy, with so many years between now and that morning, but clearly Mom and Dad were less than amused. I do not believe it was the usual Christmas morning gift exchange. There was understandably a pall hanging over it all. Without early morning shenanigans, the thought of sending the standard thank you cards to the givers of all the wonderful gifts seemed an impossible chore Mom could not bear to address. She lit a cigarette and slowly climbed the steps to the master bedroom. But the passage of time has a way of diffusing ill feelings and ill will, and by late morning, Christmas music was wafting up from Dad's stereo in the family room, and eggs, bacon, and pancakes were frying on the stove. The deep freeze in South Florida had begun to thaw, and Christmas joy was en route. Fully fueled, we rolled our new British bicycles out to the driveway and raced off down the street under a warm December sun. What would you do if you found your best friend perched high up in a pine tree? Probably not what Cricket did. Up next is Chapter 22, and it's called It Must Be Sunday.